Hey folks, welcome back to FreepCast. My name is Rob Murray. I'm your host and the managing editor here at the Free Press. We have a very different and pretty special episode this week for you. We've got James Wolner. You'll notice when the episode starts, he's via Zoom this week. He's a podcaster from North Dakota, but he's taken a special interest in a murder that took place in Mankato in 1965. The victim in that murder was the man named Ray Dahms. And James spends a few episodes getting to know Ray Dahms and the killer, Brian Hendrickson. And it's really fascinating. And he goes on, I've listened to the first 3 episodes now, and it's riveting, especially because it's a case from our area. So we had a great conversation about that. His podcast company is called Dakota Spotlight. You can check that out on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get podcasts. This particular season he's done is called Meanwhile in Mankato, and you can find it easily, like I said, wherever you get podcasts. Short word of caution, there is discussion in this episode of rape and certainly some violence. So if you've got little ones around, you may want to have them leave the room or cover their ears or something. But it's a really good piece he's done, and I think his discussion that he had with us is you're really going to like it. So without further ado, here's James. All right, James, ready to go?
Yep.
All right. Okay, we're here with James Wolner. He's the genius behind the podcast. Meanwhile in Mankato, which I have listened to 2 episodes, and it is really, really good. I do love true crime podcasts as a rule. Let's do a lot of them. Never had one that involved a crime happening so close to home here. So why don't you start out with giving me a little bit of background about who you are and what brought you to want to do a deep dive on a crime happening in our community?
Okay. Well, my name is James Wolner, and I am, you know, podcasting hasn't been around forever. So I got into this about 6, 7 years ago after a long career in IT. And I've just always been interested in audio storytelling. I always loved radio theater, and just enjoy listening to stories as opposed to being hijacked and staring at a box in the corner of your living room where you can't move and do anything else at the same time. I really like the concept of using your imagination for the visuals and audio for the storytelling. So I started Dakota Spotlight, which is the name of my podcast, 6 years ago up in North Dakota. I lived in Western North Dakota for a long time, and then I might say my base now is Eastern South Dakota. And this is the 12th season of the podcast. And basically, how it started is I came across a short article. I talk about this in the first episode about this gas station killing. 17-year-old kid walks into a gas station in 1965, kills another teenager. And I had that clipping on my computer for about 2 years, and I just couldn't drag it to my trash bin. I just kept looking at him like it's very open and shut, right? He was arrested. He can, it's all very quickly. The case is solved, right? And I think what it is also, I've always had a soft spot for some reason. I was born in 64. This crime took place in 65, but I've always had a soft spot or fondness for whatever. I don't want to break it down to one generation, but people who were teenagers in the 60s. And maybe because I was a kid and looked up to them, I don't know. I mean, I was pretty young, but I've always and teenagers who were faced with Vietnam and that whole segment of history. And I think maybe my fondness or interest in that time also plays into why I picked this story in the end. But I just knew, I've always felt there's always more to a story. You could stop any person in Mankato or in Rapidan on the street and ask them, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" or something, and they'd say, I work at the bowling alley. Well, if you followed that person around long enough, there is a story there, most likely worthy of a podcast. There's a story everywhere, and I put this on the shelf for a couple of years, and then I dusted it off, and I started looking into it more, and it just evolved from there. I guess you could say.
Talk a little bit about like where were you? Was it a bookstore when you came across, or an antique store when you came across the clipping of the murder?
No, I use that analogy in the that might be why you're asking it that way. I use that analogy. It felt like I was, right. It was a online archive of, it might have been the Minnesota Historical Society's website where they have newspapers online. So I found it online in an archive, but it felt like that feeling when you're at a flea market or something and you pick something up in a box. I use the analogy of a brass doorknob for some reason. It's like, this is really cool, but like, what would I do with it? Why would I take this home? Like, I'm not going to put it on it, or something like that. That's the way this newspaper clipping felt to me. And I think that's why I couldn't throw it away.
And before we go any further, I don't think we've mentioned the name Ray Dahms yet. So why don't you tell me a little bit about the actual murder and who was involved and who was the killer?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, when you work on something for this long, you kind of forget people don't know the story, you know. But Ray Dahms was uh, from Mankato, actually, and his family moved to Rapidan. My understanding is his family moved to Rapidan. It would have been around 61, something like that, when he was about in eighth grade. And maybe he was getting into a little bit of trouble. It's unclear, but his family moves out to Rapidan, and he comes into this school. I've spoken with many people. He was in the class of 65, and I've spoken with a few of his classmates, and you can hear them in the podcast. And he was considered different in that he was sort of, a city slicker for one thing. I mean, he was from Mankato. He wasn't from Rapidan. And I guess he had a little bit of an attitude, like, or Gay, his who became his high school sweetheart and fiance later, tells us that he I kind of got the feeling he thought, oh man, where am I in this little town? At first, but he immediately became very popular and successful, and he was one of these stories where he was the homecoming king his senior year. He was the top scorer on the basketball team. Not that they had the most amazing basketball team, but you know who their coach was. This might be a name that you recognize, Dean Broderick, who was a local athlete there. I think that might have been his first coaching job. I'd have to check, but I spoke to him and his wife Margot, and they went out. That was one of his first basketball coaching job, and he's told some funny stories, which I plan to include in some bonus episodes about that basketball team. And but Ray quickly became popular. He was well liked by everyone. He played the guitar, learned, according to Gabe, learned to play the guitar himself. He was kind of a funny guy, not so much of a prankster, I don't think. But Gabe tells a story where there was some talent show at school and he recited something which he couldn't remember, maybe something like the I don't know, she doesn't remember what it was, but it could have been um, whatever. And he did it all backwards. He's kind of he recited something, memorized something completely backwards. So he's kind of this
So I
funny, popular kid who started working out at the gas station there, which I don't know what that intersection is called locally, but at the time it was called the Roth Fork truck stop. And he starts working out there and tragically is murdered there one night.
murdered by
Yes. So a kid named Brian Hendrickson,
Ian Hendrick.
and Brian Lee Hendrickson, who grew up mostly in Blooming Prairie, Minnesota. His mother dies when he is 13. His brother Gary is 12. And then there's two younger siblings, Mark, who I've interviewed extensively for the podcast. I also interviewed Gary, Brian's brothers. And he had a sister. So after the mother dies, the two younger kids go to live with an aunt. And Gary and Brian and their father moved eventually to finally to Mankato. They were in Marshall for a while. But yeah, Brian is a senior in high school at Mankato High when he kills Ray Dahms out at that truck stop, rides out there on a motorcycle with a shotgun, kills him on early morning hours of September 26, 1965.
Crazy. So in episode 1, you kind of go into the background of who Ray was.
Mm-hmm.
Episode 2, we get into the actual killing of Ray Dahms.
Right.
Without spoiling anything, there's 4 more episodes coming, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Can you give people a sort of a summary or a synopsis, spoiler-free kind of thing of what's coming up? Because my guess is that maybe the most interesting part of this story is yet to come.
Yeah, and so he gets his trial is interesting. He ends up not having a trial, but he's in jail until the next summer of '66, and this is exactly the timing when the Miranda trial, Miranda versus Arizona, is taking place in the Supreme Court. Miranda rights come out of this. I mean, this is like, I think it's like within 2 or 3 days of the Supreme Court ruling, things are going on in his case. You know, it's just happening exactly at that time. And my takeaway, you'll hear in episode 3, I believe, is that, you know, the prosecutors there in Blue Earth County, this is all gets very sort of confusing all of a sudden, because was he read his rights, you know, and Miranda, the new Miranda ruling is going to apply retroactively to any cases that have not been tried yet.
Oh.
So it puts them in a little bit of a tough situation, and they end up letting him plead to second-degree murder. But he still gets 40-year sentence, up to 40-year sentence. And so my thought when I was looking into this, I'm like, I did all the math. I'm like, well, he'd be out by now, obviously. This was 60 years ago. What happened to him? That's really like, I wonder what happens to a 17-year-old kid who kills someone like that. I was thinking maybe I would interview him, you know, like I want to find out what happened to him. And then I start looking into some news, you know, of course I start researching, and I find an article where a Brian Lee Hendrickson has been accused of sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl at a girls' prison, the Minnesota Homeschool for Girls in Sauk Center. And I look at the name, I'm like, well, obviously that's not him. That happened in '83. I mean, there's no way that's him because he's in prison, right?
This podcast is sponsored by Minnesota Valley Federal Credit Union, happily serving those who live, work, or do business in Blue Earth, Nicollet, Le Sueur, Waseca, Brown, or Watonwan counties since 1934.
Hi, I'm James, host of Dakota Spotlight, a true crime podcast. My news series is Meanwhile in Mankato, Lies, Silence, and Murder in Minnesota. It's the story of Brian Hendrickson, a man who could charm, deceive, and manipulate almost anyone. He was sentenced to up to 40 years for cold-blooded murder, but less than 6 years later, he was working as a guard and counselor at a detention center for young girls. How does something like that even happen? That's what we're digging into on Dakota Spotlight. Come along for the ride. It's one you won't forget.
But I realize not only is it him, he only did 5 years and plus 5 years, 2 months, and was placed, according to everyone I've interviewed, and that's the brothers of this Brian Lee Hendrickson. Of course, the state of Minnesota won't give me his prison records, but that's another story. He was placed as a counselor slash prison guard at the Minnesota Homeschool for Girls 6 years after he went away, after he killed Ray Dahms. And you're shaking your head. People who are only listening to this podcast can't see that, but every single person I've talked to has said this. How is this even possible? And that's what the rest of this podcast is pretty much about. And I've interviewed that 14-year-old girl who is no longer 14, obviously. And here's the kicker. And I knew that I felt this when I looked into this. I thought to myself, I bet you anything, if I find that girl, she's not going to have any idea that he murdered anyone. I just felt it. And sure enough, we reach out to her. I had an actual journalist friend of mine make the call because we didn't know if her husband might pick up. Like, it's, this is 40 years later. It's kind of potentially a, what would you say, harmful situation, like just call someone out of the blue and, you had this, accuse this guard of sexually assaulting you. And, you don't know, does her husband know about this? What you're walking into it. So I had a friend of mine make the call, a woman, and it went great. This gal's husband knew about it. He actually did answer the phone. And, we didn't just, we got her number and it all worked out. So you can hear her on the podcast. And of course I was right. She didn't know that Brian Lee Hendrickson, the man she accuses of rape, killed. She didn't know until this year when we told her that he had killed anyone. So while that sounds like I'm spoiling, it's not. There's more there. And you'll hear from the brothers and you'll hear from Michelle and her husband and friends of Ray Dahms. And the podcast starts in Rapidan and it ends in Rapidan again. We circle back to Ray at the end and revisit with his friends and his fiance at the time. And it was a heck of a ride. That's all I can tell you.
That's incredible. I'm just kind of on that.
And I almost go ahead.
You got out so quickly, and then he's sent to work at a place like that, and no one there knows what he did.
And Michelle is her name, the girl who was 14 at the time. She has kept in touch with one person who worked there. So it would have been one of Brian Lee Hendrickson's colleagues. And they didn't work closely together at the homeschool, but they were on the same staff, and this is a state-run, the state of Minnesota runs this place, or ran this place. And so Michelle recently reached out to this friend, like, hey, I just learned that this guy, Brian, he actually murdered someone. This guy that I accused of, raping me, he murdered someone. Did you know that? So this would be a colleague of Brian Lee Hendrickson's at the school. And she said, no, I had no idea. She had no idea anyway. And it's almost like, I hope I'm wrong. Usually you spend so much. I worked on, this intensely for the last 5 months. And I think I say in the podcast, I gotta be wrong. Right. And I hope I am wrong. I hope the state of Minnesota says, here, here, take a look at this is what actually happened. And then at least we'd get an answer, but everyone is just shaking their heads, and there's things there's more revelations, or what's the word I'm looking for? There's some things I'm not sharing with you. There's more craziness to hear in this podcast.
So you mentioned that you wanted to try and talk to Brian Hendrickson. Did that ever happen? Did you ever track him down?
I guess you could say that. He passed away in 2018. And all I'll tell you is to his deathbed, there were surprises all the way to his deathbed. This guy's, the one thing I haven't really said here so much is that he his own brother said he was an incredibly good con man and just a liar, right? And he lied himself all the way. He lied himself, come on, all the way to the grave. I mean, I'll just say that, and don't want to spoil everything.
So you say you spent 5 months on this case?
At least, I mean, the art. I had the article on my computer for a couple of years, and then there were. It took a while. Once I found Michelle, who was the girl at the homeschool, we agreed to an interview, but for different reasons with their schedule and mine, it took like 5 weeks for that to happen through. So that kind of delayed things a little bit as far as that part of it. But yeah, 5 weeks or 5 months, I guess you would say. Yeah.
How similar is this case, or where does this case kind of land for you? You've done like 11 or 12 seasons of your podcast, correct?
Right.
This one's similar.
I mean, I guess I like I already told you, I just have this fondness for that time period and people of that age. I just always wondered, like, what the heck was it like for, you know, for for men mostly, coming into that Vietnam era, like you're getting out of high school and you don't know, like when I graduated from high school in '83, it's like, what are you gonna do with your life? I mean, that was a hard enough question, but I can't imagine what it was like when with Vietnam coming down on top of you. Just like, I don't know. I feel like I got off track. What was your question? I lost my train of thought.
I don't even know what my question was.
Yeah, but I'll share one thing.
I
Okay.
asked you to kind of compare this season to the other seasons, and if it was similar in subject matter or in vibe, or like,
Right.
sort of compare this season to the other stuff you've done.
Well, I'm very, as the others, but I'm very proud of this one. And what I really like is that by the end, so one thing I haven't shared here. So Mark Hendrickson is Brian Hendrickson's little brother. I interview him at length. So, I want to figure out this story. When I first talked to Mark, who was only 6 when the murder, Ray Dahms was killed, and then is living with a different family at this point because their mother had passed away. He didn't learn the truth about this Brian's murder until he was in his 30s. His family told them that they told him that this brother was in college when he was in prison. And then they finally came clean and said, well, he's not in college. He's in prison. But a murder happened by accident is what he was told. And you'll hear all about that in the podcast. So this guy, when I found Mark, it was like we bonded real quickly because we were both trying to unravel the same story. And he'd done some research on this earlier where and when he learned that his brother actually, it was no accident, he was just enraged at both at his family and kind of like a family secret thing. But so he's always felt bad for the Dahms family, and Ray Dahms' parents and Rodney and Randy, his brothers, are passed away, and Mark Hendrickson has always sort of carried this feeling of the family guilt or whatever for this thing, and he says, I wish I could have told the Dahms family how sorry I am and how sorry the family is. So through this podcast, before it's over, he feels like he missed on that chance. But in the podcast, he actually speaks with Michelle, the 14-year-old girl. So in that way, I'm really proud of this season because it reminds me a little bit of season 9 I did about a quadruple murder in North Dakota, where all 4 families of the victims spoke with me, but also the family of the murderer spoke. And it felt like something a little more than you're just reporting on a true crime about, what happened, but it's more about the people involved. And I don't know. I'm really proud of this one. I'm really happy with the way it came out. And the people. It was a pleasure learning about the meeting, mostly on telephone, people from Rapidan, and learning more about the area. And yeah.
So what was it easy to get, folks in small town Minnesota? I mean, Mankato was small town Minnesota. Rapidan is tiny town Minnesota.
Yeah.
Was it hard to get them to open up about not a great topic to discuss?
Well, trying to think how I even got there. I think I found a phone number for a church in Rapidan. I thought they'll help me, and I said, hey, and I getting into the number for the Rapidan Historical Society, something like that it's called, there in Rapidan, and spoke with Paula there, and she helped me get names of other people to interview, and a gentleman named Roger Funson, who's in the podcast, class of 65, got me more telephone numbers. And I think what helped is, I think Ray Dahms was such a popular kid, and I can't imagine what it was like for these guys, now 78 years old, the class of 65. They've talked about this their whole lives, and then I come along and I want to know, everything about it. And I think the timing was good for them, and so it wasn't particularly difficult. And I feel very fortunate that Brian Hendrickson's brothers took part, because that would have been the what I would have expected to be the tough one, to find the family of the murderer, right? But they were on board. They have plenty to say.
As you're gathering your information for this podcast, there must be you must have a mountain of information. Is there a lot of stuff that you just couldn't get into the podcast that maybe you would have liked to? You just didn't have.
Yeah, there absolutely. And one thing I've learned with creating these podcasts is there's a term in filmmaking apparently called kill your darlings, where you cut things out that you really like, but they're just not working. And like the director or whoever, right? It's the same for me. I've got little stuff that I'm like, God, that's so good, but why isn't it working? So you end up cutting it out, and the whole segment works better. So usually removing stuff is more helpful than harmful. But there are little things, like I can share one thing that didn't make the final cut, just for people listening to your podcast. Brian Lee Hendrickson, I should have really had this in there. One of the things his brothers told me was that they caught him stealing. They once caught him stealing money out of the collection basket from the church. I mean, I laugh. I don't know that I think I just forgot. There's just so much about this guy that I think I just forgot. Like, that'll make into like a bonus episode, stuff like that. And I've got, like I mentioned, Dean Brudwick, basketball coach, before. I've got some great stuff, him talking about the basketball team and his frustrations with the Rapidan High basketball guys. Not in a real bad way, but I'm saving that stuff for like bonus episodes. It just doesn't quite, you don't want to derail your listeners with tales about basketball when you're, trying to get from murder to rape in a girl's prison.
So when you're doing a story like this, and I'm thinking back to like the stuff that I've done when I've covered a murder or something equally as terrible, you do tend to make a personal connection with the sources. Did that happen to you at all? I mean, did you find yourself really drawn to the people who were affected by this?
I guess you could say that. Yeah. That does happen in some of these seasons for sure. And, my heart goes out in some ways to Mark Hendrickson, the little brother who was just trying so hard to get the truth. I mean, there's nothing so exasperating than just asking someone to tell you the darn truth. And I touch on that a little bit in the podcast as well, comparing what's worse, the truth or being lied to, So Mark Hendrickson was great. I couldn't have done this without him, and everyone in Rapidan was great. Roger Funson, as I mentioned before, or not, Roger Funson, yeah. Class of 65 was incredibly helpful. He scanned yearbook pictures for me and just had some great conversations off the record with nothing to do about the murder. Just really nice, pleasant people I've met along this journey. Really.
What's the most challenging part about coming into a case where you don't know the people, you don't know the area, you never heard of Rapidan? What's the hardest part about starting that journey? I mean, when you've made the decision, you're going to do a podcast about this story, but you don't know much about anything around here. Where do you start? What's your process?
That's a good question. I think the biggest obstacle is making the decision for me personally. Once I've decided, then I can be pretty darn stubborn, and I don't get discouraged real quickly. It's not as easy to get people's phone numbers these days as you would think, right? With the internet and social media and everything, you would think, oh, not a problem finding someone's phone number, but it can be a pain. But I'm a little fortunate now that I have this body of work that I've done that I can refer to, right? So in the beginning, it was, a little harder to explain the kind of work I try to do. My type of storytelling, which I always say I'm not about sensationalizing crime. Like when you listen to this podcast, you're not going to hear a bunch of gore. I mean, even though it was a gruesome murder, the shotgun at 4 feet twice, 2 shots, you're not going to be, I'm not going to be describing the gore, right? That for me, that there are other ways of making an impact. See, I did it again. I always go off on these tangents and I lose my train of thought. Oh, what was the question? Jeez, James.
The most challenging part about doing like this.
Yeah, I guess getting that first person to listen to you, I guess. But I do pretty well there. I've mentioned this before in interviews. Like people will ask me, what's your trick? What's your little trick for getting people to open up and relax like that? And I don't have one. I don't have some tactic. And that makes me feel really good. I just talk to people. In my mind, I'm just talking to people. And I feel like that's the one attribute that I was just sort of given that helps with this whole thing, because obviously that helps, right? But there's for me, there's no trick. I'm just really curious to find out what this person has to share, but getting that first conversation is probably the hardest part. But like I said, once I think people in Rapidan this time, they were so happy and ready to talk about Ray Dahms. He just seemed like a great guy, a really great guy.
So have you, especially with the folks in Rapidan, did they get to listen to it before the rest of us? I mean, did you give them a preview at all, or?
I did not. I mean, I put out a preview for everyone. I do this little segment about full service gas stations, which is kind of almost comical because, full service in the 60s, completely different than going to a gas station today. So I put some, but no one got a preview. No. So
Did you get any feedback though, now that parts 1 and 2 have been out?
I've only heard from one Roger who listened to the whole thing because as a subscriber, you can listen to the whole thing right away. And he thought it was great. He said, "Oh, I didn't know I was talking to a professional." So, but that's all I've heard so far. It's only been a week now since we put out episode 1 last week and episode 2 today.
Is there anything else that you wanted to let listeners know about
I guess just that, if you want more information, I do have a website, dakotaspotlight.com. And as I mentioned, a subscription model where for $5 a month, you can listen to the whole show today. And you also get access to, I've made some bonus content online. So one for each episode, which has photographs of the people in the story, a few documents, some sound clips, and I'll keep adding to that. But you can sign up. My subscription model is called Spotlight Plus, and you can learn more about that at dakotaspotlight.com, or actually on Spotify and Apple apps. You can become a subscriber right there in the app and stuff. But
Also,
other than that, it's just been, yeah, go ahead.
you can also see all the other seasons of your.
That's a good point. Oh yeah, there's also 11 other seasons you could listen to if you want. Yeah, very good point. And by the way, I mentioned the Mankato Free Press at least 3, 4, 5, at least 4 times in the podcast.
I did hear it at least once today.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Well, that's all we've got for you. Thank you very much for taking time for us. This has been very, very interesting. I can't wait to listen to the rest. I probably will subscribe to get the other. So do you have to subscribe to get all the episodes, or will they all be free eventually?
They will all be free. I should have mentioned that. They come out 1 episode a week. So, and we might be taking a Thanksgiving break. So episode 2 came out today, episode 3 next week. And then the next week, is that Thanksgiving? I'm not sure. I think so. But basically 1 episode a week for 6 or 7 weeks. So yeah, you can listen to them all free as long as you listen to those advertisements that we all have to put up with. So independent podcasters like me can try to scrape together their rent. Basically is what's happening.
Well, James, thanks again. This has been fantastic, and good luck with everything else you're doing. And
thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure to be here. I've learned quite a bit about Mankato and that area since I started this. Seems like a really cool place. So thank you.
It's okay. It's cool.
It's all right.
It's cool. All right.
Cool.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.